Good morning, everyone. Just gotten ready for my first day of school and I'm about to leave, hopefully to get there about like 20 to 30 minutes in advance just to like vibe on the campus and make sure I can find my classroom because that's always like the first day stress and it's my first day ever, so I think it's gonna be double that. So I'm excited and a little nervous. It's crazy. It's like my first like sort of March start date because obviously in the US school starts in September, so it's like kind of spring vibes, but it's also snowing right now and it's just like does not feel real that I'm about to go to school. But yeah, I'm excited to take y'all along with me, so let's go. So that's my first day of my master's done, which feels so crazy to say. It honestly is a little surreal that I'm back in school. It feels both incredibly natural because I've only taken technically like 9 months off of being like a full-time student, but also just so strange at the same time, like seeing other students, running to class, being nervous about like finding my room and everything. It feels like I'm back in like undergrad again, but obviously it's a completely different environment in Seoul and at yonsei, and it's also just a completely different vibe as a grad student, even though I low-key feel the same, to be honest. Today actually ended up being really chill because our class was just sort of an introductory session and it ended quite early, and so I got to go to a cafe nearby and like work on some translation stuff for a little bit. But the class itself seems really interesting. This is called Reading Hanggang in Translation, and it's talking about Hanggang's work, which obviously she won the Nobel Prize for Literature last year, and so it's a really big deal globally, but also especially in Korea, and we're reading her work in translation and talking about sort of what made it such a tour de force in English, and also like what are the politics of translating, especially when she writes about such culturally specific things, including like protests, dictatorships, even massacres, feminism, all this kind of stuff. So I'm really excited to sort of take it, and the fun part is that this class is actually in English. It's my one English class out of 3 that I'm taking this semester, and so I'm so glad it was my first class because I felt like it was such a easy transition back into school, because there wasn't that sort of like slight language stress. I feel it's not a language barrier because I don't necessarily like miss much in Korean, but it's more just like stress because introducing myself, talking about myself, whatever, obviously that's a lot easier to do in English. And so yeah, we're reading a lot of theory about translation, a lot of Hanggang's translated books, and so I'm super excited to like talk about them with you guys as the year goes on. And I think it'll just in general be really chill and also just a great space to like explore my interest in Korean translation, but like in the academic sphere. So yeah, I think it's shaping up to be a little less scary than I imagined, which is always good. It's also really fun being in like the Sinchon-yeondae area. I've never taken any classes in Korea at any point at any college campus, and so it feels really new to be in like a space full of like college students. It's such a young area and there's so much like fun little things that you can do, a lot of cafes, a lot of cheap food, and it's just in general very sort of like energetic, good vibes, and so I'm super happy about it. Tomorrow I'm taking the one required class for my major, which is sort of like Korean studies theory. I think we'll be talking a little bit more about like area studies and the point of Korean studies, like what it's for. So I'll update you guys on that tomorrow, but overall I think it was a good first day. Thank you guys for coming with me. Let's get some sleep before the next big day. because the school semester started on a Tuesday and not a Monday, because that weekend was March 1st, which is a national holiday here commemorating sort of like the fight for independence from Japanese colonization, and that Monday was sort of like a national holiday. Basically, I'm taking 3 classes, and one of them, like my first week, got pushed to essentially tomorrow, which is Monday, after having 2 classes last week, if that makes sense. So I paused filming for a little bit because in that time there was my boyfriend's birthday, and we went on a short like 2-day trip back to Cheonju, which is, if you guys know, one of our favorite cities here. And then in sort of like school news, there was like a departmental meeting, and so I got to meet some of the other people in my department, and we got to hang out for a little bit. I feel like I know some familiar faces now, which is exciting. Like, not quite friends yet, but hopefully like I'll get to keep, you know, getting to know these people. It looks like my 3 classes this year are going to be a reading, Hanggang, and translation class that I talked to you guys about, an intro to Korean studies class that's sort of like the intro for the whole major, and then a East Asian comparative media studies class, I think. Basically looking at like contemporary media and media studies, but specifically in China, Japan, and Korea, and comparing the 3, I think. So that'll be interesting. I've never taken a class like that before, but it just seemed really cool and also a little bit more modern, which tends to be what I'm interested in. I've started doing my readings for the 2 classes I took, and for the reading, Hanggang, and translation class, it looks like we're going to do sort of like a overview of translation and translation theory before getting into our actual works and discussing like how they were translated to English and what we think about the translations, etc., etc. And so this week's first reading was The Philosophy of Translation by Damien Searles. I feel like it's one that I would have wanted to read on my own anyway, especially because I work as a literary translator. It feels like such valuable information. Basically, Damien Searles is like a sort of well-known literary translator. In the book, he talks about like the history of how people conceived of translation, specifically how some people saw it as just a transfer of information, other people saw it as a transfer of the experience of reading it, or sort of like the artistic elements of reading it. In the past, people debated sort of foreignizing or domesticizing elements of a translation. Basically, are you going to try and signal that this is a translation and keep things a little unfamiliar for the reader, or translate almost everything so an English reader can understand it all? But he also problematizes a lot of these questions, basically saying that a lot of these assume that there's just like one English reader, for example, just as there is just only one like foreign writer, and it kind of takes away the individual experience of each individual book, each individual writer, each individual reader, and also each individual translator, because each translator is sort of interpreting the work in their own way. And yeah, I feel like it's been super cool so far. Apparently in the next half of the book, he's going to go into like examples of how he deals with like words and phrases maybe and other things in translation, which I think will be super helpful, because these are questions that I've been having as I translate, just like, you know, how to deal with certain words that are really tricky or that are super specific to Korean, etc. So I think it'll be really fun. But I just wanted to share this part that I really liked, where he says basically, this is sort of his grand thesis at the end of this section, that translation does 2 things and relates to language in 2 ways. He says it redirects the arrow. So he talks about an arrow, basically saying like the arrow from the story or the writer to the reader or the audience, basically saying that the intended audience of a work completely changes with the translation, because it's a different language and it might also be a different era, etc. But he also says that at the same time, translation recreates the arc, and the arc is essentially like what the experience of reading the book is. And he specifically mentions that the arc starts from like the norms of a language, quote unquote, or the conventions, or what he calls the baseline. Basically, every writer's writing off of what we consider like the baseline or the normal line of a language. So if the writer is, you know, a 2020s contemporary American writer, is this a very standard sort of literary voice for that person, or are they deviating from the norm? Is it really formal? Is it really experimental, etc.? In the same way, if it's like an 1860s writer from, you know, Germany or Korea or whatever, what is the baseline for that era and that type of voice and language at the time, so that you can decide how much to differentiate from that baseline, how much to add in style, essentially, instead of just translating literally from the text. And I thought that was really interesting. I feel like it's definitely something I'd like to think about more, because like a lot of literary translators, when I first started, I wanted to be really sort of like literal and stick to the text. Over time, I had to realize that's not actually how to approach translation. It's sort of about recreating the experience, especially in language as well, which I think is super cool. So yeah, those are sort of like my reading chats for school, which is crazy. I think it's fun to read a few more like academic academic texts now because I've been reading obviously fiction by myself for the past like 8 months or whatever since graduating. And it's also nice that they're all about translation because it's stuff that I do very regularly that I want to do. And so it's like all questions that I'm having.
저녁이요?
So I guess I'll update you guys tomorrow on how that last first class goes, but I think overall it's been a very good first week. A little surreal just to be in school and also to be in school in Korea, and I feel like it's definitely a little bit jarring to like, exist as a student again and also exist as a student in Korean in my case, in another language, except for this translation class, which is done in English. And I'll talk more about that hopefully as the semester goes on and as I sort of collect my thoughts on it. But yeah, overall it's been good. The weather has been so much better this week. It's like climbing into the 50s. I think spring is on its way. And in general, I'm feeling really good. The trip to Jeonju really revived me as well. It was really nice being in sort of like a more naturey, sort of quiet place, just to get out of like this crazy city for a bit, which was amazing. And yeah, I think I'm gonna spend the rest of the day sort of chilling, it's Sunday evening, prepping for the week ahead, and then maybe getting to my translation sample, which I'm just trying to read through one more time before finally sending it off. So it should be a pretty chill evening. I'll catch up with you guys tomorrow when we go to class again.